Computer. Okay, we are now recording. We're going to start and be prompt. I want to welcome everybody. It looks like we have 15 members of the seminar who are already here. Others will undoubtedly show up as the Spirit moves them. And we have 17 other people watching us. So that's a nice group. This is the first time we're trying this particular kind of event. The Nbsi Seminar is a group of people who primarily have made their living in the academy or have achieved professional level storytelling. At the time the group was put together, and we get together usually between the festival gathering when it meets in person and see what we can learn from each other. And then we brought in some other people because of the specific expertise they had. So those of you who are attending, we're really glad you're here. I think you can post in the chat, and you can feel free to do that as you wish. If one of you wants to do that, then I'll know you can. David Rhodes, I'm going to elevate you to a panelist. Oh, some of these folks are actually not our folks that are just in the wrong and not quite in the place I want them to be. How did Kathy Culmer move over there?
Phil, did you say something about us putting SEM in front of our names?
Yeah, don't worry about that anymore.
Okay.
I figured out how to get you there before we started. Okay, I think I got everybody who is there. So welcome to this event. The idea of the event is that we will look at how echoes from the Hebrew Scriptures appear in one particular story from the Gospel of Mark, the sea crossing that's in chapter 4 of Mark. One of the techniques the seminar uses is we listen to the same story multiple times. And so we'll listen to 4 different people in succession tell different translations of the sea crossing. And I invite you to think about if it hits any buttons for you in terms of Hebrew Scriptures, or like if you say, you know, this makes me think of this movie. You can do that too. And we'll have a time where you can post this in the chat. Before we get going, I want to plug a book I'm very excited to have come out. Our keynote speaker from last year, Sarah Agnew's book, Embodied Performance, has come out. And it is on the publisher Whitfenstock, but you can also find it on Amazon. So without further ado, we are gonna go to our speakers. If anybody who's not a speaker at this moment could mute themselves just to be safe. And I think when Tracy starts speaking, she will become the only view you see. That's what we're hoping for.
Okay?
Yep.
All right. Partly because one of my number one takeaways from the Gospel of Mark is the humanity of Jesus, and partly because of a powerful personal experience I had a couple years ago, and partly because I'm an educator and I know how exhausting it can be to teach all day long, especially if your students aren't getting it and you are required to tell or come up with new ways of trying to get the same point across. Those are going to impact the interpretation that I'm going to give you tonight. And in the context, particularly the stories that come right before this particular story, impact that largely as well. So with all of that in mind, let's hear the story from Mark's Gospel. So it was later on that same day that Jesus said to his disciples, let's go across to the other side of the sea. So leaving the crowd where they were, they took Jesus with them in the boat, just as he was. And there were many other boats with them. Suddenly, a great storm of wind arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat began to fill with water. But Jesus, he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And the disciples went and woke him up saying, "Teacher, don't you care? We're dying out here." So Jesus awoke. And he rebuked the wind. And he said to the sea, "Oh, peace, peace, be still." And the wind ceased. And there was a great calm. And then Jesus said to his disciples, "Why were you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were filled with awe. And they said to one another, "Who then is this? That even the wind and the sea obey him?"
We can do this too if you want to do it visually, yeah. So what we're asking you to do, are you seeing me now or are you seeing Tracy still?
I have it on gallery view so I can see everybody.
Okay. Okay.
I'm seeing you.
Okay. What I'd like you to do is think about the Hebrew Bible stories that Tracy's telling poked for you, and in the chat type those. And if you want to chat other comments to her like, "I really loved," you can do that too. And we'll just take 2 minutes to do that. So it's really nice. Actually, it happens real quickly when you can use the chat because we can all be talking over each other.
Where's the damn chat?
And Mark Hoffman, you're on deck.
Joanna, you want to go ahead and mute yourself, although I do love hearing you at the computer. I just want to say.
Yes, I'll happily mute myself.
It's awesome. I hate muting people. It feels like I'm taking away your voice, but everybody does it themselves, so I guess we're okay.
And those of you who are observers are certainly welcome to type in this time period too. So just to name them for those of you who are like not seeing it, Genesis 1 came up, Genesis 2 with Adam sleeping when the rib is taken out, Jonah.
Excuse me, Phil. I'm not sure if all the panelists realize that they're making their chat comments visible only to other panelists. And if we'd like the observers to see them too, you need to check your chat settings to read all panelists and attendees, folks.
Thank you. That is true. Almost everybody posted the default one is the panelists. So I'll read them for the people who didn't see them. Jonah came up. Obviously Jonah, creation. Still small voice and Elijah. The Exodus, Psalms that talk about a sea battle. The question of Jonah, who sends the wind and Mark, is put in here. Job to some extent, Elisha and the two bears, Moses parting the water. All right, excellent. We're gonna go to our next person, who is Mark Hoffman. If you want to introduce yourself, you can, but otherwise you can just jump right into your story, Mark.
Okay, thank you. And what I would recommend, if you're seeing the gallery view with everyone, up in the upper right up there on the view, if you click on that and if you click to speaker view instead of gallery view, you'll be able to see me a little bit more clearly and focus here. And for some reason, Phil, I'm only seeing you yet. I'm not seeing me. The other thing you can do is, if you see my picture, is if you click on it and the little 3 dots, and you can do for pin. And if you pin, you can make that person the center person in the picture there to enlarge it.
Everybody else is seeing Mark, right? Wave if you're seeing Mark. Okay.
Great. Okay, I'm predicting setting this up here. First of all, I'm chained down, so I'm having to deal with that. Also, I'm setting this up as if I were doing it in a congregational setting, introducing it. And so our gospel text is Mark chapter 4, beginning at the 35th verse. And what you need to know in order to appreciate this story is to recognize that Jesus and his disciples have been up in the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee, just right about there, if you can see on the map behind me. And Jesus has been teaching to a very large crowd, so large, it says, that he had to get into a boat, and he taught to the people who were gathered along the seashore and the hillside. And he'd been teaching them in parables, and we all know how challenging and confusing parables could be. But it says that privately, Jesus had explained everything to the disciples. And in fact, he had given them the secret mystery of the dominion of God. How well had they learned? Well, and on that day, when it became evening, Jesus says to his disciples, let's go across to the other side of the sea. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him along with them since he was in their boat. Oh, and there were also other boats. And there comes a great windstorm, and the waves were crashing into the boats. The boat was already beginning to be swamped, but Jesus, he was back in the stern on a cushion sleeping. And the disciples roused him up, and they keep on saying to him, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die?" And he got up and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Silent, settle down." And the wind stopped, and there came a great calm. And he said to them, "Why are you such cowards? You're still not having faith, are you?" And they became afraid, filled with great fear, and were saying to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" And they came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes. The word of the Lord.
Thank you, Mark. It's his first time, I think, telling in the seminar, so thank you.
Thank you.
Same drill. If Mark's telling either sounded the same buttons or kind of hit on some new ones, type those comments in there. And remember, make it available not just to the panelists, but to everyone.
Hopefully you only have to do that once. Once I switch to all panelists and attendees, it does it from then on.
Yep. Unless if you're speaking, you're chatting with somebody during somebody else's performance.
If you're doing private stuff, make sure you see that private. It's in all red. It's the words of Jesus. Know when you're going private, when you're going public.
Megan, you're on deck, just so you know. We'll give it a minute.
Yep. Here's to hoping my cat doesn't make a dramatic appearance in my telling, but no promises, y'all. We might get cats in the boat.
It's the best way. I mean, it's the best way for you to go viral, Megan. You gotta have something happening in the background.
Wilson is trying really, really his best this quarantine season.
Oh, Noah came up this time. Grumbling in the wilderness. All right. You can still type while Megan's talking, although I'm sure you want to give her your full attention to her. So you're up, Megan.
All righty. I am also tethered, so I will not be getting up. And sorry if you can hear people in my house. And everyone else did such a good job of contextualizing this, so y'all already know the context. I'm not going to bother. And on that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And so leaving the crowd, they took him with them into the boat, just as he was, and there were other boats with him. And there arose a great windstorm, such that the waves were crashing up into the boat, and it was already being filled. And he was asleep in the stern on a cushion. And so the disciples roused him and said, "Teacher, does it not matter to you that we're perishing?" And having been roused, he rebuked the wind. And he said to the sea, "Be still, be silent." And the wind died down, and there was a dead calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" Well, they were greatly afraid. And they said to each other, "Who then is this, that the wind and the sea obey him?"
Applause, and it's applause for two people because I forgot to do that last time. Get Mark in there too. Thank you, Megan. And same drill. If there were some new buttons that were pushed, or if you just want to give her positive feedback, go ahead and do that. And Pam, you're on deck. One of the gifts Jesus offers, sarcasm, or one of the services he provides. All right, thank you, Megan. We're gonna go to Pam Farrow now.
It'd help if I unmute, right? Okay. So I will be telling not from the NRSV, but from what we could call the NRST, the new Richard Swanson translation. So, yeah. So you know the context. Thank you, everyone, before. So on that day, when it was evening, he says to them, "Let's go across to the other side." So, leaving the crowd, they take him. Since he was already in the boat, other boats were with him. A great windstorm arises. The waves beat into the boat. The boat is being swamped. And he was in the stern, his head on a pillow, sound asleep. They wake him. They say to him, "Teacher, don't you care that we're dying?" Well, he woke up and he rebuked the wind. And he said to the sea, Silence. Be still. And the wind stopped. There was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid like this? How do you not have faith?" And they feared, a great fear. And they were saying to each other, who then is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him.
Thanks for the cue, so I know when you're done. Same drill, and then we'll go back. And then, Pam, I'll give you a moment when we're done to mention the thing that you and Richard are doing in case if anyone that's listening wants to join you in that.
Okay.
Some of you are still only presenting to panelists. You need to change it to the next drop-down thing. It says panelists and all attendees. Sorry, y'all, we're working on it. This is our first time, so. Like the awestruck disciples, felt the amazement, who just thought something unthinkable had happened. Shivers was amazing. Like the change of volume, the secret motif came through. Great talking to the camera, effective whispering. I like the drama you bring and the way you use Zoom format. Excellent translation, Richard. Prescient, real time. Fear of the Lord motif came through. Shivers at the end.
Phil, those are all to everybody. I just want to note.
Oh, thank you.
He read my words, but I had clicked it correctly. I just want that to be on the record.
Okay, whatever.
Whatever.
All right, so I'm gonna invite Pam to mention a project that she and Richard are doing together briefly, and then we'll go to a conversation where, so you might want to switch to gallery view so you can see different people as they speak, and so I can see you when you're waving at me saying you want to talk.
Great. Yeah, I just put a link in the chat for everybody. That's a link to the Eventbrite page. Richard Swanson and I, and actually I would love it if Richard would pipe up for a minute after me too, are doing a 4-week presentation series of workshops beginning October 29th called Resurrection and Resistance, the Gospel of Mark, where I will be telling significant portions of Mark throughout the 4 weeks that Richard has identified that he will then, well, he uses the term embroider about afterwards. We have a number of people signed up already. We have room for more. We think it's going to be really good. And if you go to that link, it will give you all the information that you may need. You can also ask me and Richard. Richard, do you have a comment to make?
I think you said it as well as it needs to be said.
Great.
We worked together last year on the Gospel of Matthew and had such fun. We're going to keep doing this.
Mm-hmm. So we'd love for any of you to join us and spread the word.
So we're going to open it up to the group. Just give me a wave like this. I think that'll work. Unless if you're a non-video seminar member, then you'll have to type in the comments. And, you know, well, we're going to talk for 10 maybe 15 minutes. And so you can monitor yourself so you don't talk for 10 or 15 minutes. And the main theme is how are you hearing echoes of the Hebrew scriptures in what you saw? But if you go off track a little bit, that's acceptable. Joanna, you need to unmute. There you go.
I'm okay. The more I heard the repetitive performances, the more and more I got enmeshed totally into Mark's story, entirely unaware of anything outside it. I was brought totally into the experience and lost a sense of illusions. Because I was in the drama, there was no critical part of me functioning then.
Cliff.
I think that's a great point, Joanna. I wonder if that's because we are products of a literary culture. So we're tuned to catch illusions visually and not orally, right? And if we were trained to hear these stories, then we might recognize those illusions through hearing them. But we actually need sight, maybe, we need to see the words to capture the illusions.
Jason Chestnut.
Yeah, and I think visually, Tracy's story did make me think of Jonah. I did just read, full disclosure, the Jonah article before joining, but it made me think a lot of like Jonah spending that amount of time in the belly, of course, which is like Sheol, right? I mean, it's got this very strong connotation that the article, of course, makes the point that I agree that there's a lot of echoes of Jonah. So, I mean, I think I saw it. Both actually, Tracy using the camera and Pam using the camera, both of y'all used it in different ways, either come very far or very close. Also, I agree with Joanna. I mean, I'm fully invested in the story, but thinking about it, I saw Jonah.
Yeah, it really required an effort for me to be intentionally making connections to other stories. Megan, and then Jan, and then Kathy.
It was weird because, like, you know, hearing it twice and then telling it, I like got to see what other people were thinking. So then when I got to the point when I was telling it, where I'm like, I am controlling the sea. I was like, oh, this is very like parting of the Red Sea. It's like, aha, look, I can control the water too. And it wasn't even something I know that's what the theme of this was, and it wasn't something I had put together until I'd seen it. And then as I was telling it, it sort of changed my understanding of like, this has a resonance. Like, this isn't just like Jesus is the only one who's ever controlled the ocean. Like, someone's done it before him. So I thought that was an interesting thing that came up in my head.
Very cool. Janet.
Yes, having done this story with quite a few groups who have in recent memory or are still living a very animistic sense of the role of a shaman who can channel God's powers or the God's powers. Very often they take the story as Jesus having is the trickster, intentionally getting the disciples go into the boat, and of course, you know, they go at night and you know, nothing good happens at night. And so the whole dilemma of this is just trying to work out Jesus' intentions. Is it malevolent or benevolent? And I really found Tracy's presentation curious, because it's one way of balancing that awestruck fear that you do want to convey or portray or share that these disciples would have felt, but at the same time giving a clue to Jesus' intention wasn't to trick these disciples into, but I mean, do I know? I don't know what Jesus' intentions were, but it was a great a great balancing act or probability, because a lot of the people that we work with really grapple with this role of Jesus.
So Kathy Culmer is going to go, then Richard, and then Marty. No, you're going to speak. You're going to just talk, right, Kathy, not tell your story? No, you weren't? Okay, then we'll go to Richard.
The thing that was shaping my translation, and that I heard in several of the performances picked up just from the story, was a conversation I had with a man I know who was a Great Lakes boat captain. And I asked him about this scene, and he said, the only thing you need to know on the big lake is that the lake doesn't care. And that connects nicely with what Janet was saying, because in this scene, it's also a question whether Jesus cares or not. He's asleep. And when I mentioned that to my friend who was the captain, he just made this noise in his throat that, I mean, he had opinions about crew members who would sleep at a time like that. They were not good opinions.
Very nice. Marty.
The comments that Janet and Richard just made kind of line up with mine. And part of what I'm bringing to this is having worked through the 3 sea crossing stories with Greek students in the past few weeks. And it gets worse with each story. This is the most benign one. But there really is a sense that Jesus is forcing them to the boat, sending them out. In the next story, they're going to be scared to death. He's made them go out in the lake in the middle of the night, and the wind is against them, and they can't row against it. And he walks across the water with the intention of passing them by. And I'm not sure we're supposed to identify with the disciples, because the other thing I'm bringing is hearing the conflict, because of other work I'm doing right now, between Jews and Gentiles in the early church. I think the audience for this story is Gentile. And they're still close enough to Jesus. They remember that he was Jewish and his disciples were Jewish. But if he was legitimate, how come those, Jewish folks aren't there? And what the story does is they can, and for 2,000 years of reception history, people have heard this story and at best puzzled about why couldn't the disciples get it? And at worst, and again, I'm reading the 3 stories in a sequence, so it's not just from this story. But at worst, they say what idiots they were. We're so much smarter than they were. No wonder it got taken away from them and given to us. Sorry, I know I'm almost the black crow, but I do really hear something toxic in this one.
I see Joanna not raising her hand, but wanting to get in on that. And then, if not,
No, I was just wincing.
okay. Cynthia.
I observed in Tracy's telling, I felt like it was a wonderful sort of echo. I felt like Jonah was telling the Mark story.
Huh.
I felt like all of the gestures and so obviously settling in while everybody else does the work felt very, very Jonah to me. And so then what struck me was that part of the struggle of the whole incarnation is that we often don't access the divine power or aren't aware of the power that is in us because of the incarnated power of God in us. And so I was thinking of Jesus' response to that and watching her Jonah-ish, from my perspective, presentation of it. And it highlighted for me how oblivious I often am to what I'm being asked to engage.
And I think that's a good place to pause then. thank you, everyone. You're participating so nicely. And if somebody's on my second page and you've been waving your hand, I apologize. There might be, yeah, if Nathan or Tom or Quasi want to say something, I'll give you an opportunity. And Chuck, because I couldn't see everybody on one page. You're good? Okay, then we're going to go to Kathy Culmer, who will unmute herself, and we'll make sure we're on speaker view. Cynthia, oh, how come you're coming up, Cynthia?
Because I was the last person to speak.
Oh,
That's
got it. How do I do that? Kathy, are you there?
I am. You know, so maybe I need to, oh, there I am. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
Now, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, "Go at once to that great city of Nineveh and cry out against them, for their wickedness has come before me." Instead, Jonah set out for Tarshish to flee from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and he found a boat that was heading to Tarshish. So he paid his fare and went aboard to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a violent storm arose that it nearly broke the ship apart. All of the sailors were afraid, and each one cried out to his God. Then they began throwing cargo overboard to lighten the ship. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone below deck and was in the hold of the ship, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain of the ship came in and said to Jonah, "What are you doing in this sound sleep? Get up and cry on your God. Perhaps he will take thought of us so that we do not perish." Now the sailors said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots to see who to place this blame on for this evil that has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they said to Jonah, "Tell us, why is this evil happening to us? What do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people do you come?" And Jonah said, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were all the more fearful, and they said to Jonah, "What have you done?" Because they knew that Jonah was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had already told him so. And then they said to Jonah, "Tell us, what can we do to you so that the sea can calm down for us?" For the sea was growing more and more turbulent. And Jonah said, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and the sea will grow calm for you. For I know that it is because of me that this great storm has come upon the sea." Instead, the men rowed harder, trying to get the boat back to land, but they couldn't. and the sea grew more and more stormy. Then the men cried out to the Lord, and they said, Lord, please, we pray, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not make us guilty of innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as you pleased. Then they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea. And the sea ceased from its raging. And the sailors, the men, feared the Lord greatly in their fear. And they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and they made vows to him. But the Lord provided a large fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights.
Thank you, Kathy. We're going to go right into Cliff so we see them as close as possible. Let me find you, Cliff, first, though.
Okay, here I am.
Send me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, you're up.
Okay. And that day, when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowds behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. And there were also other boats with them. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves broke over the boat, and the boat was nearly swamped. And Jesus was in the stern, on a cushion, sleeping. And the disciples woke him, and they said to him, Teacher, surely you care that we're perishing. And he got up, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased. And there was a great calm. And Jesus said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still not have faith? And they feared with a great fear and said to one another, Who is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him. And then they came across to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes.
Thank you, Cliff. So now we'll applaud for the duo, the dynamic duo that went for us. Why don't you, we'll give everybody a moment, attendees and the panelists, to type any comments you want to have, and especially echoes that you heard when they were laid side by side. Ah, interesting. Oops, you can hear me.
That was so good, RJ. That was amazing.
I'm glad it was interesting, because if I could have had another comment in a different circumstance. All right, we're going to go to gallery. You might want to click it in gallery view so we can see folks. And with us for the first time at the seminar is Elizabeth Strothers-Malbin, who many of you read her article. And I had told her she could have first response to what she's seen tonight. You need to unmute.
Well, I thought being first was an advantage. Now I think it's a disadvantage. I must tell you that having them, you said having them side by side, they were always side by side. I have spent so much time with Jonah and Mark that there is no Mark 4 without Jonah. It's not possible anymore. It's too in my head. So even when Tracy started, you know, when Mark and Megan and Pam, when they did Mark, you know, Jonah was side by side for me all the time. So it's hard. And I had actually wondered whether or not Kathy and Cliff would be doing it responsively. I mean, you know, one would say part and then the other would say part. I mean, that's an option, although it's pretty hard. And if you're on different parts of the country on this particular arrangement, you know, we have in our church tried to do some responsive prayers of the people.
We're going to try that next. Jason and Cynthia will try that, so you're going to see it.
Okay, that's tricky. So I have more comments about the Jonas story because that was the first, actually the first ever, Kathy, that I've seen anyone present the Jonas story. And these were so good. It reminded me of what I had seen too, and I said when my writing, you know, that the sea story is a bigger part of Jonah than it is of Mark. And so the characters are more developed, and you really played that out. I mean, I love the way you played the sailors. They were just so believable. And I had to go back and look at my text of Jonah. I thought, I never noticed, what do we do to you so that the sea will be calm for us? I mean, that is so obvious as soon as you said it, but it wasn't so obvious all those other times I read it. So that was like wow, light bulbs. So when Cliff was telling, I was reminded again that, you know, it's just a smaller story. I mean, this one boat story is kind of gobbled up by the Jonah story. But in my research, I've looked at all three of the stories. And I think what Mark does is he puts part of the Jonah, most of the verbal connections in the first story, but he puts some other things in the other stories as well. But he doesn't round out the characters as much as those sailors and the captain, you know, that was a really believable thing. So I was, some of the things that I had realized in reading were reinforced, and some of the things I totally missed in reading were present. I guess you guys are used to that, right? So I'll stop there for now.
Okay, I need to see hands if somebody else wants to talk. Cynthia.
I was also struck by what do we need to do to you to save us? And it immediately put me in mind of how transactional and zero sum we still want to make the story of us and God, that in order for me to matter, you can't matter. Someone has to be chosen, which means everyone else has to be unchosen. So there's no win-win here. Tell me how to kill you so that my life can be spared. That really came across to me.
Richard.
I've just been thinking and wondering about that. And I need to look at the Hebrew. I need to sit and stew on it, and I have not. But that question could be read a couple, at least 14 different ways, but two of them are, what do we have to do to kill you? A transactional read. That's the way I read it first. But the fact that these pagans are in fact clearly reluctant to kill Jonah marks them in this story as followers of the Noahide commandments, in which case the question might be, so what is it that you want us to do to you just to save ourselves? In which case they are in fact the heroes in this piece.
I think Elizabeth had her hand up. Did I see that?
Yes, yes. I wanted to second that motion. And they try very hard to not throw him in. You know, after he says, throw me in, they still try very hard not to throw him in. And they really can't. And then after it, you know, it's at first they fear the storm, and then they fear Jonah running away from his God. And then they fear God. They fear God. And they sacrifice sacrifices to the Lord. And they vow vows to the Lord. And Jonah says he will when he's in the belly of the fish. He never does, not in the story. But they actually are past tense by the narrator said that they do those things. So actually the sailor, this is a big contrast with Mark. The sailors are much more pious than Jonah. But the disciples are not more pious than Jesus.
David Rhodes, did you have your hand up? Or were you just scratching your head? Okay, Tim Coombs and then Chuck Mantle.
Yeah, it's often when I've read the sailors, when they start praying to God at the end, that basically say, look, don't blame us. We're in this situation because you made this happen. So they're saying, this is on you, God. Don't pin it on us. You know, so it really sort of emphasizes that even more.
Chuck, were you trying to get in?
Yeah, just nothing profound, but it's sort of the interesting C version of an atheist in a foxhole. But when they are saying afterwards that they gave sacrifices, obviously that happened after Jonah was jettisoned. So there had to. If you're sensing that the narration has merit, somebody else there thought about it enough that they were talking about this after the fact. So there was an impact on the people involved in the story long enough for the story to be told. At least that's what the narrator would have you think.
Marty. Thank you, Chuck. You're muted still.
Oh, now I'm unmuted. This brings me back to the idea that the story actually is more of an attack on the foreigners, both sets, the sailors and later the Ninevites, come across very positively in Jonah. In that book, you could not ask for a better response. Jesus does not come off as well for me in the Crossing the Sea stories as the foreigners do in Jonah. But again, I'm not sure it's a story so much about Jesus as about those idiot disciples who can't get it. And by the time you get to the third one, he is just reaming them out. In implicit contrast to the foreigners, the Gentiles in Jonah, who do get it. And that takes me back around to the sense of a Gentile audience hearing this story and being able to congratulate themselves. I worry so much about the ways that the Bible teaches us to think in us and them without us ever realizing that it's doing it to us. And now especially I'm sensitive to that. And man, it feels like these sea crossing stories majorly do that. And the interaction with Jonah is playing into that.
Megan.
Yeah, I put this in the chat, but I think I'm struck with the idea, and this is like if it's about the disciples versus like if the disciples and the sailors are comparative groups. The sailors are like, they're trying to row to shore, they're praying to God, like they're like, okay, what are the things we do when our boat is in a storm? The disciples apparently just think the thing they need to do is wake up Jesus, which then like makes me think that they maybe get it slightly more than people are giving them credit for in this story, just because it feels like a little kid that like wakes up their parents when something is wrong. Like it's like, uh-oh, gotta go get mom. But like mom is Jesus in this case. Because it's like the thing they do in times of trouble is turn to Jesus and go, why are you asleep? Help. Which I think is interesting.
I was going to say, so I've been working on Jonah. he doesn't say, don't blame us with innocent blood. He says, don't blame us with innocent blood. As in, this guy's getting what he deserves, given what he did. Marty.
Back to the comparisons in the comment about wake up. There's another Hebrew Bible intertext for that, and I won't say too much because we're coming up on a telling of that one. But there is a whole tradition that people in that part of the world would have been familiar with about the Creator God defeating the waters at the time of creation. And the proof that God has done so is the world will be justly ruled, and the God can build a palace and relax and go to sleep because it's all under control. And then there's a whole series of prayers in the Bible that say, God, wake up! Or God, rouse yourself. It's not as under control as you thought. Things are a real mess. And I think that would have been heard very strongly when they say, wake up. It's actually, it is both an act of trust and an implicit accusation. You aren't living up to what you told us you were doing in terms of keeping the world safe and just and under control.
Cliff.
I know Kathy might have some comments as well, so I know be interested to hear her thoughts. My comments are more kind of the process reflections on what it was like for Kathy and I to try to work together to think about how we could emphasize allusions. And I found just in just the short time we were able to work together, and it would have been very nice if we could have actually been together physically and seen each other perform and kind of really studied that a little bit more. I think we could have done more. But there was at least 3 different kinds of allusions that we tried to make, right, that we thought of. And one was visual allusions, right? And so I was watching very closely to see how Kathy did the storm because I knew I was going to have the wind come up, right? And so as much as I can, right, to imitate a gesture, right? So there's a visual link as well. Then, of course, there are oral links, so there's words. And so we kept some of the odd phrasing. We intentionally kept in the feared with a great fear in both stories, and of course that caught people's ear. That came up a lot of several times in the comments. So those oral links are one thing, but then there's there's other things that we could do. One of the ones I didn't know what to call it, but we could make a link when it came to pacing. And I noticed this in a lot of the tellings of the story is that we followed very similar in the Mark 4 tellings, very similar pacing cues in terms of when we sped up and when we slowed down. And that was also something that even Kathy and I could do. If I didn't know what to call it, but when we're talking about the characters who are asleep, one of the things that we could both do, so we're not relying on just the word sleep to create the oral link, is to try to create a pacing link where we slow down at the same point in the stories, and that might help create some of the illusions. So trying to think about what are the various tools available to storytellers to help make illusions, and it might be very different than what we're used to with written texts.
Kathy was trying to jump in. She was on the my second screen, so somebody pointed that out to me.
Well, I went ahead and put it in the chat box. I just really wanted to say, and then when I heard Cynthia make the comment that she did, as I was thinking about that, and I sort of thought, even though I've told this before, I thought of it a little differently this time because of Cliff's notes and the translation that he sent to me. And this time because in that translation he sent, that's where it says that they ask him, what can we do to you so that the sea will calm down for us? And it was that, but also, and the fact that they're throwing him over. Anyway, what I was reminded of was in John 11, verse 50, when it says, you do not realize that it is better for you, this is Caiaphas speaking, you do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. And that was just sort of in my thought when I was dealing with that passage in preparation. That's all. I just wanted to point that out.
Am I still unmuted? I am. I was thinking that there's all these crisscrossing of the Jonah and the Mark story, and maybe they're not supposed to be explained. Maybe they're like the parables that just happened, and we're supposed to kind of struggle with them and figure out what we make of it, right? And so there's not like, oh, this is what the narrator's going with. Maybe what they're going for is confusing us enough that we stop and think. So we're going to go to the second telling, and this is an experiment. So I want everyone to mute themselves except Cynthia and Jason. And this is the first time ever they're going to try to do a back and forth. And I'm going to put it on speaker view, so it should flip between them, but you know how hard it, no? Just leave it like this?
Yeah, leave it on gallery because of the delay. Otherwise, the one who's silent would be the face.
Okay.
How long, O Lord, will the foe scoff? Will the enemy revile your name forever? Why are you holding back your hand, your right hand? Take it out from your bosom and destroy them.
Later that day, when evening came, Jesus said to them, let's cross over to the other side. And so, leaving the crowds, they took him with them in the boat just as he was. Other boats followed along. Gale force winds arose, and the waves battered into the boat so that the boat was being swamped, but Jesus was in the rear of the boat, sleeping on a pillow. And the disciples woke him up and said to him, Rabbi, don't you care that we are drowning?
Yet God, my King, is from of old, working out salvation in the very midst of the earth. By your might, you split the sea. You destroyed the sea serpents on the face of the waters. You crushed the heads of the Leviathan and gave them as food to the creatures of the wilderness. You carved out torrents and brooks, and you dried up the ever-flowing streams. Yours is the day, yours also is the night. You set every light in the heavens and the sun. You established the very corners of the world. You made both summer and winter.
Jesus got up and he gave orders to the wind. He said to the sea, shut up, be still. And the wind ceased and there was a dead calm. And Jesus said to the disciples, why are you still afraid? Don't you have faith yet?
Remember this, O Lord? How the enemy scoffed, how an impious people reviled your name. Do not deliver the life of your dove to wild beasts. Do not forget the life of your poor forever. Take note of your agreement, because the dark places of the land are filled with haunts of violence. Do not let those who have been violated turn back in shame. Let the poor and the needy praise your name.
Kai Aphobethesin Fabon Mega. They feared a great fear, saying to each other, who is this? The wind and the sea obey him? How long, O Lord?
Why don't you type some comments before somebody else says something that knocks your thoughts out of your head? And that's everybody, panelists and attendees. Any thoughts? This is the way that was suggested earlier, where we're flipping back and forth. So let's see how that way of experiencing a text influenced it for you. Next time we get together for the seminar, I'm going to give you people's comments without their names attached and see if you can guess who made a particular comment without seeing the story. I bet you could figure that out with some frequency. So we'll open it up. So what we'll do is we'll talk about this particular story for about 7 or 8 minutes. And then we'll go off and say, what did we learn in this whole process for the 10 minutes or so that'll be left for us. So give me a wave if you want to talk. Dave Rhodes.
First of all, I have to say how wonderful it is to see so many of you who I know so well and love so much. Thank you. And I'm delighted to be a part of this. Just a minor note, all these presentations have been wonderful. And this back and forth opens up so many things. One thing I was struck by was that I think we've made the assumption that the storm at the Sea of Galilee is a natural phenomenon that Jesus calms. But in Jonah, it's clearly an act of God. Is it possible that early people hearing this story for the first time, when they hear a storm brewing up like this, that they might think, what is God doing? And where would that lead things? It's just a thought. Interested in what others might think of that.
Joanna, you need to unmute. Nobody said silent. Shut up.
Thank you. I exactly with David, even with Jonah and even more with the performance you just did, where God is so clearly encroached. Who or what is causing the storm in Mark? And I think an ancient audience would ask that question. This picks up on what Janet was saying earlier. And I've been stopped by that question really from straight in the beginning when Tracy was performing. What is Mark doing here? This is not a question I've considered. Elizabeth, did you consider it in your larger work on this?
I'm sorry, I've gone on different tracks. So which question did I consider? I heard most of what you said.
The question of who or what is causing the storm in Mark when you start paralleling it against.
No, I didn't. I think they're both stories. They're both made up. So they're full of fiction, and I just didn't think about it. But I can't even get to where you guys are. When I first saw Psalm 74, I thought it was a typo because I could not figure I could figure the connection. And I thought, well, I'll hear it and then I'll see the connection. And I am totally mystified of what you were trying to tell us. Because for me, that psalm is very nationalistic. You didn't read the last two lines, which is a clue. Rise up, O God, plead your cause. Remember how the impious scoff at you all day long. Do not forget the clamor of your foes, the uproar of your adversaries that goes up continually. And you, God, said Jonah, should wipe out Nineveh. So when I read Psalm 74, I think, wow, that's what Jonah was thinking. But I don't think that's what you were thinking. So I'd like to hear more other people say what they're hearing that I'm really missing here.
Cynthia.
Well, we did the pericopes we were assigned. Is the answer to why we cut it off where we cut it off. Jason and I were wondering what you all would make of our clear power that we used in the way we split it to select what the theme would be. Mm. And I think that's a lesson for all of us when we remember the role of the narrator and the editor of the texts, that we are being guided in a certain direction. And we decided that the theme of this would be, how long is this going to go on? And do you remember all the scores that need to be settled? Do not let me die this early in the game. Jason?
Also, just to, I think the fascinating thing about the pericope question is why I have questions about how Cliff and Mark went longer on their pericope than the rest of us, right? I felt it was kind of the weird way to end. For me, they're fearing a great fear in Mark. They're fearing a great fear. And so when they're saying, who is this? I don't think it's like a general thing within the Gospels of the people saw who Jesus was and they rejoiced and they went and told, near and far. It wasn't that. It was, they're literally fearing a great fear. And so I'd just be fascinated. I think that's just that most of us stuck to the pericope. So then I was just trying to think of what I could do. And of course, me and Cynthia, once you pair in a psalm, Dennis Dewey style, you can do whatever you want. And so we tried, of course we just tried with this, but I'd be interested to see why, like Cliff or Mark, why y'all went beyond the pericope, which is a great choice.
I'm guessing Cliff would say the same thing. Just a quick answer to the question. They both have the business about going across to the other side of the sea. Yeah, and so that forms the frame that rounds it off. And that was the only reason why I included it.
Well, I think it's really good, Mark, because otherwise it's a hard end. It's weird, in my opinion.
Mark, kind of how the gospel ends.
Tracy.
That is true.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it doesn't end with the fear. It ends with them asking the question, who then is this, that even the wind and sea obey him?
They're still afraid.
What a great way to leave it to the audience to continue to wrestle with that themselves. So, and it's very Mark because, as was just said, how the whole gospel itself ends. So, I mean, the pericope, ideally you hear the whole gospel in one sitting, right? But when you can't do that, I think it works really well to leave the audience questioning themselves, so the story continues within them.
Yeah, and 100%. I want to say when I tell this on my own for another thing, I'm going to end it with that sort of. It just for me, I'm still struggling with. How do you ask the question the disciples are asking and they're afraid? I don't even hear it in myself. How do we ask a question like in fear? That's a question I have. I mean, that's something that I struggle with. That I think Cynthia's telling of the song kind of brought out, at least from my experience.
Tim?
I mean, and Jonah ends with a question too.
Right.
Not quite as deep as that one, but much cattle too. That's a weird ending. I mean, so maybe there's a mimicking there too.
Marty, you want to mention, you were the chooser of the psalm, and so.
I chose it because I wanted to catch the theme of controlling the sea and the God resting and needing to wake up because things are scary and out of control and we're in danger. That I think was a really common theme in the culture world and that people would have heard. And it's one that's not part of our culture world, and so we miss it.
Carol, were you trying to jump in? No? You were waving. Cynthia, were you trying to, or were you waving? That's who you were waving to, probably.
Everybody stop waving, okay? Just don't do it.
Blink twice.
I'm not waving, I'm trying to get in.
Okay, go for it, Elizabeth.
Especially for Marty, because Marty, I think the reason I was having trouble with this psalm, I didn't know you chose it, but it's because I was doing what you said you were doing earlier, because you were thinking of all three sea stories in Mark. And it's hard for me to rip this one story out of its Markan context. And what my work on Mark and Jonah are saying is, if you look at the whole context of Jonah and you look at the whole context of Mark and three stories, then you say, oh my gosh, they're both about God's mercy to foreigners. And Jonah doesn't get it till he gets a second try. The disciples don't get it, they need a second try. But I think Mark is concerned, and Mark is concerned, like Jonah's author was concerned, with the audience not getting it. So all stories are for the point of view of the listeners, not the point of view of anybody else. So,
and I think the difference, part of the difference in how you and I hear it, is that in Jonah, the tellers and the audience are with Jonah, with the one who's not getting it. I'm not at all sure that either Mark or his audience identify with the disciples who don't get it.
well, I think when Joanna winced earlier, there's a debate among how you interpret the disciples in Mark, and I'm on the side that the disciples represent to the hearer how hard it is to get it. And if, wow, those guys had trouble and struggled, but Jesus did not give up on them, then maybe Jesus won't give up on me, and maybe I won't give up on myself. So, and there's others who say the disciples are the bad guys and they represent. So, and that's a basic divide in Mark and the scholarship.
You could call them fallible followers.
Thank you.
I just want to call attention to a couple things in the chat because not everybody is able to do two things. Nathan have been having an interesting chat about if the sea could be considered a character instead of a setting. And then I think it was Megan who said, how would the story be different if you were part of a community that experienced the threat of sea crossings and storms on a regular basis like most of us have not? So Megan wants to now follow up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up like on a lake near the ocean, like large bodies of water, even if the Sea of Galilee isn't like as large as some could be. Water is one of those elements that is particularly terrifying and uncontrollable in a way that like it is literally unstoppable. And I think that the idea of being in like what is probably a smaller boat in the middle of a storm, like my brother like really enjoys watching Deadliest Catch and just watching like the tiny boats in the Arctic, and you forget sometimes how big and terrifying water can be, especially if you're in a landlocked state and you're not perpetually around water. But this is normal and terrifying. So I'm wary of making the storm not a natural storm, because there's something uncontrollable and terrifying about a natural storm that I think shouldn't be brushed aside in the quest of supernatural.
Oh, except that I'm not sure that this natural unnatural distinction.
I will agree with that. I may be.
That they would have made. Yes.
For sure, yes.
Great Lakes girl, yes. I am from the Lake Superior country in the Edmund Fitzgerald. The lakes are dangerous. But who sends any storm in the ancient way of thinking?
Nathan, do you want to jump in? You're typing interesting things, so I just want to give you the opportunity. And we haven't heard your voice.
Great, yeah, thanks. No, I'm just enjoying the chat because there's so much good stuff going on, I can't keep up. But yeah, I don't know. I think I was particularly drawn to this last little piece that we were talking about, you know, what Megan's bringing up about, are we character, or do we know what it's like to be in a life-threatening situation? And then there's been a little bit of back and forth about maybe some refugees. Who are those people? Maybe it's not us. And then I just mentioned this particular text has been an interesting set of Bible studies for people living with HIV in South Africa. And they actually were drawn to this text. And so the life-threatening journey is a bit metaphorical, but for them, you know, and this is something they pulled from the story, that it's time for Jesus to wake up. And it's partly a look at where is Jesus now in our real lived reality. And part of that is a call to the church, maybe. I don't know all of who it's a call to, but whether or not, you know, that theme is something that I think is there, that they pulled out, that I think is really an interesting piece.
We're going to go to, we have 8 minutes left. If there's any more general observations you want to make about what the experience tells you about echoes or lack thereof, David Rhodes is going to get the first word in.
Just following up on Nathan, I think this has a lot of environmental things to reflect on. Storms, stopping storms, destruction, fear. It's very timely in that regard as well. That's all.
I'm wondering if somebody earlier used the phrase energize. I'm wondering if lots of times intertext isn't anything about it. It's not anything about, but that it's not simply about importing meaning, but it's swiping energy from an earlier story and repurposing it in a new one. That, you know, this is a button, when you push it, audiences respond. And so I was just thinking of the way people use intertext in terms of pop culture, like, have fun storming the castle. You don't sit back and say, now in The Princess Bride, what's going on in this moment is this. And so the speaker is assuming the role of Billy Crystal, which means they feel they have magical powers, and right? It's just, you're swiping the energy and it's fun. And so I think there's a dimension of that in the storytelling that's hard to unpack, but in my experience, it can be true. So like when I do the shrubbery, it's got a Monty Python voice in it, right? And it becomes the largest of all shrubberies, right? And certain audiences respond to that. And it has nothing to do with the meaning, but it's a way of saying, look, our life has to do with this sacred story, and they bounce off each other in interesting ways. And that, I mean, that's really all I'm going for, not some kind of conceptual thing. And so I'm wondering about, in performance, if it's always about meaning, or if it's sometimes you're just going for a cool impact. Jason.
I agree with Megan in terms of the intertextuality thing, which Phil, you and I have spoken of before, but I've just been thinking about, if we're going to look at our cultural storyteller right now, generally being Hollywood, for better or for worse, the storm scenes like in Forrest Gump, and even in the Truman Show, it has the person like screaming out at God. And I'm just wondering if that's, you know, a linguistic, or not a linguistic, but like that's a step that directors are taking that I think has the general vibe of what's going on here, which is, as Dave brought up, where's the storm coming from and how are people responding to it? We see that, and I'm seeing that a lot visually with film.
And it pulls you into that experience, even if you aren't one of those people who live seaside, right? Like if you I'm thinking of the Truman Show. The guy's in the bathtub watching the ending. If you're not familiar with it, I apologize, but he's in the bathtub watching the end of it. He's got his towel wrapped around him, and he's like experiencing the storm himself in that moment. And so that's part of the energy that I'm thinking gets pulled in from another story.
Phil, Tom has a finger up. It's hard
Okay,
to
which
see.
one is it?
Tom Boomershine has a
Okay,
finger
good,
up.
the pointer finger. Good. Okay, that one we can use.
Unmute.
Yep.
Unmute, Tom.
He's working on it.
All right. How's that?
Better.
What strikes me is that both the beginning of Jonah and the end of Jonah are a kind of inspiration for Mark. You know, when I look for parallels or precedents for Mark's ending, the clearest example of an ending that leaves questions for the listeners to ponder and that are then lead to a kind of engagement with the story that is very atypical. Not a satisfying ending. Mark is not a satisfying ending, both. And so both the beginning of Jonah with the storm and the end of Jonah with the open-ended question of God to Jonah are you know, what strikes me is that Mark loved Jonah and was kind of inspired by Jonah, and that your comment, Phil, about that part of this is fun, that there are delightful dimensions to the endings of Jonah and Mark and the beginnings with the storm and the storm of Jonah. So what I'm hearing is a rich interaction between these stories, and that Mark had heard Jonah a lot, knew it, and kind of internalized it and told the Mark story, the Jesus story, in the framework of his experience of Jonah, and just the sheer fun of that. And for me, it brings back all the memories of my first exposure to Hebrew, my 6 weeks intensive with George Landis. And what we read was Jonah. And so the sheer delight of the Jonah story is, I think, also a kind of inspiration for Mark. And then for
David Rhodes is going to have the last word.
Oh, geez.
So make it quick, David, please.
I just want to observe that this is wonderful, the way we're reflecting on these associations, the way we're interpreting the stories, the possibilities that are opening up. And I just want to remind us that there are people who read these stories because their lives depend on them. That's the way they read them. Women who read the women's stories, people who are sick, the healing stories, immigrants read these crossing over stories, people under persecution. And we just need to think of ourselves, as many of you have mentioned, in solidarity with them. Because, as I say, they're reading because their life and well-being depends on them.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, that's a good word. I gave the last word to the right person there. Thank you to everyone. Thank you especially to our tellers who have told, and just everyone for jumping in, for our observers, our attendees who've also listened in. Find my email and send me feedback if you need to do that. Our next event like this, since we got a really good attendance, this is more seminar people than we usually it's about the number we usually get at a seminar. We have 24 people here from the seminar, and I sent out invitations for 35, so that's really amazing. The next, so I stuck to this same time slot. We try to move it around so the same people don't get excluded, but since this one works so well. So on November 16th at 5:30, we'll be doing Central Time. We'll be doing another one of these, and the theme is we're inviting people to tell stories that help that they have found important to them and to tell during the pandemic. So it's a very different kind of thing we'll be doing. I've only had one person tell me that she's ready to do that, and so other people should email me if they're interested. If somebody has another idea that they would like to do for these events, we've got several months before the next festival gathering, and we like playing around in Mark. It's going to be the Mark year, and the whole, if you have different ways of playing with the intertextual thing as well, that'd be a great thing to keep dwelling on. But we're also open to somebody saying, as long as it's kind of performance-based and not talking head-based, let's, if you have something you want to explore in the group, that'd be great. Although we're all talking heads on Zoom, right? So what am I saying? So Godspeed to you all. Be well. Love you all.
Thank you, Phil.
Gotcha. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Phil. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Nice hearing all of you and seeing you.